Hello, I'm Lucy from Bookshanks and I'm here today to round up the first 3 books from the Booker Prize longlist. Welcome back to our channel, where this month we are reading our way through the whole Booker Prize longlist. So if you are joining us for a book review, if that's how you found us, lovely to meet you. Please do subscribe. We're going to have the whole lot, hopefully, by the time the shortlist is announced. We've already read 3. We've read The Wall, Lost Children's Archives and My Sister the Serial Killer, and I will link those in the description down below. But these are sort of the first ones that we're getting to review, having known that they were on the long list. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. 10 minutes and 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak. An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. And Lanny by Max Porter. All 3 books which I really liked, actually, to varying degrees, I must admit, and none of them sort of without their things that irked me. But overall, I think we're off to a pretty good start. I'll talk about this one first. Lanny by Max Porter. And this was probably one of the ones that I was most looking forward to reading. It is set in the present day in Middle England, in the home counties, proper commuter belt stuff, middle class village, and people that, if you live in Britain, are very recognisable. It follows, it follows a young boy called Lanny, although you never actually see his viewpoint. Instead, you are given the viewpoints of his mum, his dad, a local artist who he befriends in the village, who everyone else thinks is really rather strange, and also, which is kind of the hook of this novel, you get the viewpoint of Dead Papa Toothwort. Now he is, how do I describe him? Do you know what? This book is just so unlike anything I've ever met before. He's kind of a spirit, a ghost. He wanders through the village, taking on the shape and the persona of the things around him, from the trees and the plants, through to the rubbish on the floor, through to embodying the people in the village too. Now, this book is set in 3 separate parts. The first of which is sort of focused on Dead Papa Toothwort's interest in the village and the people who live there, and in particular Lanny. Now, Lanny is a boy, I'm not sure it ever actually told how old he is. I'm guessing kind of about 10 or 11. And he's not like the other boys in the village. He's just got this energy about him. He's interested in everything. He's fiercely independent. He roams all over the place by himself, and everybody thinks he's really pretty strange, but also, you know, can't help but be charmed by him. Dead Papa Toothwort included. Now, Dead Papa Toothwort's wandering around. This is a really rambling description of this book because it's bizarre, I've got to say. It's an unusual one. And he listens to the people in and around the village in a really fascinating way. So he hears snippets of conversation from, you know, the really mundane, what people are having for dinner, to the village gossip, you know, of who's hanging out with who and really shouldn't be, through to just, you know, casual racism that is dropped in left, right and centre. And it's written, I'll see if I should have found it before I started, but it's written, I'm not sure if you can see this, sort of all over the page. And as his section progresses, the words like intertwine and they merge, and these little snippets of phrasing are so vivid and rich, and you just felt right from the off like you were holding something that was a real treat. They're so luxurious and they're so nailed on as well. I was just like, my goodness me, I know these people. I know this environment. Now, the second part of the book is where it ratchets up a gear. I was reading the first part and I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. I like this. I can see why everyone's being, so complimentary. And then bang, you hit the second part and it is like someone has just lit a match under it, and boom, everything just, the tension goes sky high. It rockets. This whole sort of way through, it has this like fairy tale feel, kind of a fable. So the writing is lyrical, but it's also very, very dark, and you have this sense of foreboding that something is going to happen, and then bang, it does at the start of part 2. I kind of, well, I'm going to be a little bit careful what I say here. I don't think that if I were to tell you what was happening in the start of the second part, it would be a spoiler, because I certainly had heard it from various sources before I read the book. That said, in case you haven't heard it, I'm not going to tell you. But basically, it involves Lanny, it involves Dead Papa Toothwort. And the second part of the book is consumed by that relationship without really anybody knowing that that is the relationship that is consuming the novel. The third part of the novel is kind of where it lost me a little bit. It really pushes the boundaries of sort of supernatural acceptability and plausibility in my mind, but that's kind of a personal taste thing. It's just strange, and it reminded me, if anybody ever watched The Mighty Boosh back in the day, Old Greg, we're kind of getting sort of a little bit into that territory. Weird, but it just about pulled it together for me, and overall I just think it is, for a small thing, it's incredibly powerful. The atmosphere is just crackling the whole way through, so incredibly tense. And actually, despite the fact that there were a few moments in the third part where I was like, really, what? At the end it does pull together, it does make sense, and I was satisfied by it. So overall, this was a really good read. I liked it a lot. Before I move on, actually, I should talk a little bit, just a really little bit, kind of about the overarching theme as well, because it is a really hard book to describe, and I feel like I have just rambled my way through it, and you're probably wondering what on earth this book is about. But there is a central theme that does tie it all together, and it's sort of about how history repeats itself, about how everything exists in cycles, and though we think we're moving forward, actually the fundamental core of human nature remains the same. What scares us, what worries us, and what motivates us, and what we love, those things do remain the same, and history acts in these cycles, and to an extent, you know, we get what we deserve, and we bring on ourselves the negative situations that we are in. And so it is worth saying there is something that hangs all the weirdness together. And I liked that message a lot. It's done with a light touch, and the social commentary is sort of secondary to sort of this gripping, tense story that I really wanted to know what happens next. Next up, I'm going to talk to you about An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. Now, this book is set in Nigeria in, I think it's probably the noughties, and it focuses on a young man who is a poultry farmer. Did I say it was in Nigeria? It's in Nigeria. A young man who's a poultry farmer in Nigeria. He's uneducated, he's not very well off, and he is mourning the death of his father, who was basically, you know, sort of his only family. When we meet him, in the opening scene, he saves a woman from committing suicide. Fast forward a few months later, and he meets this woman again by chance, and what follows is a love story, basically. The sort of kind of doomed love affair of will they, won't they, but also the lengths that we go to for love, and looks at themes of destiny and human sacrifice and self-destruction, and basically all these enormous themes that are then put into what is actually a pretty epic story. What happens kind of inevitably when Chigozie falls in love with Nadali is that her family, because she is sort of from the other side of the tracks, she's wealthy, she's educated, her family do not want this marriage to take place. So he embarks on a very literal journey to sort of prove himself worthy. Now, the twist in this story, if you can call it that, is that this whole novel is narrated from the perspective of Chigozie's guardian spirit. So his Igbo chi, which lives inside him, and whom the spirit refers to as his host, and who keeps an eye on him and not so much guides him through as sort of reacts to what he's done and tries to sort of mitigate the complications, and I guess a little bit guide him. But the whole novel is narrated from this perspective, and it's a really clever and interesting device. It's good because obviously we're looking at a character who is uneducated and not very worldly, and yet by looking at him through the eyes of his guardian spirit, we're able to sort of be much more articulate about his feelings than perhaps he would be, able to be very sort of analytical and wise and all-knowing and all-seeing, because of course this spirit has been around for I think 700 years or more even, and going in and out of different people as their lives end, and so has this sort of wealth of knowledge that it can bring to the point of storytelling about a character who wouldn't otherwise be able to necessarily articulate those things. So that is the really great bit of the viewpoint. The bit that I didn't love so much was that I felt, well, two things I guess. One is that I felt like I was being held at arm's length from the characters a little bit, arm's length from Chigozie by this guardian spirit, because I couldn't feel him directly. We had to do everything through sort of a third person, and I thought it just like dulled the sharpness of sort of the emotions really, and made it harder for me to root for him, I guess, really, in all that he was doing. The other thing, which isn't necessarily to do with the specific viewpoint, but it's to do with the way that the viewpoint is constructed, I guess, is that the language is incredibly flamboyant. I mean, I learned a lot of new words in this novel. I was frequently having a quick, Google to see what things meant. It is very, indulgent, and at times that is absolutely brilliant, and you do go, oh, those sentences. But on the flip side of that, it did make it dense, particularly at the beginning. I did sort of have to feel I worked to get to the good stuff in this novel, purely based on sort of the language and the fact that, this lofty viewpoint didn't make me feel like I was getting straight into it. The other sort of little gripe that I had with this novel was to do with the female character. So Chigozie's love interest, the woman that he wants to marry, she is very one-dimensional. She I never really got why she loved him, and it's sort of all about Chigozie, and Nadale is, she's sort of skimmed over, and she's just sort of like, his emotions are projected onto her, and I don't necessarily get her back, and that was a little bit frustrating at times, to feel that it was one-sided. What I did like about this novel though, because despite those things, I did find myself really rooting for Chigozie, and I mean, he gets himself in some pretty horrendous situations. Clearly the epic journey of love does not go smoothly in any novel like this, but I mean, it really doesn't in his. But you do still root for him, and part of that is to do with the humour, I think, that runs through the book, which is very subtle, but it's always there. And part of it, I think, is to do with the fact that he is just fundamentally an outsider, trying to get in. And I love those type of characters. I'm always a big fan of the underdog. And ultimately, I think, when you look at it as a whole, and the writing and the skill with which the story is told, it is really very captivating. And I think that his first novel, The Fisherman, was shortlisted for the Booker in 2015. Haven't read it, but makes me think could be his time. Next up, I'm going to talk about Elif Shafak's 10 minutes and 38 seconds in this strange world. She is a British-Turkish author who typically writes novels set in Turkey that look at themes around violence towards women, and this novel is no exception. The 10 minutes and 38 seconds in the title refer to the dying moments of Tequila Leela's life. Now, she is a prostitute, she is in a dumpster, and she knows she is dead. She has met a very grisly end, and her body has ceased to function. Yet her mind, as science apparently dictates, keeps acting for a further 10 minutes and 38 seconds in which she looks back over the course of her life. That looking back constitutes the first half of the novel, probably a little bit more than half. So it's in 3 parts actually. The first is this mind part, looking at how her mind continues to function once she knows her body is dead. The second part is body, what then happens to her body once her mind really does give up the ghost. And then the third part is soul, although that is a very, very short part at the end. So it's mostly looking at sort of what happened before via her mind keeping acting, and then what happens to her body in this dumpster after her mind ceases to function. And I really enjoyed it. I think the writing is incredibly good. It's so vivid in terms of looking at place. And I loved how all the little details of Istanbul are thrown in. And actually, I mean, I went to Istanbul earlier in the year, and I wished I sort of read it at the time that I was there, but having been there, it just sort of lifted off the page for me. But I think, you know, obviously you've got a little bit of bias there, but actually it would do that anyway. And it has these bits of, history of Turkey, and also, you know, a little bit of the region and a little bit of, you know, wider geopolitics in general thrown in as we look at sort of the 50 years of Tequila Leela's life that got her to this point. The other thing that it does in the first section of the book is look at 5 friendships that she picked up along the way, 5 friendships that were really pivotal in her life, because there were many reasons that led to her being in the dumpster, and along the way her family, her blood rejected her, but she made these water friends, and it's sort of the central theme of the novel. One of them is that water can be thicker than blood on occasions, and we look at how each of these 5 people became her, you know, her chosen family, I guess, really. And each of these people are outsiders as well. In Istanbul, so we have a transvestite, we have a disabled woman, we have an immigrant, and they all form this really strong bond. And then when it comes to the second part of the novel, the body part of the novel, these friends sort of rally around to step in when her family, who have deserted her, even in death, to give her sort of what they feel she deserves. And do you know what? It's interesting because actually I think in a way each of the individual characters in this novel, I found them quite forgettable. You know, even Tequila Leela, although she was the best, and the 5 friends, they were sort of kind of cliches. They're like ticking off, you know, the outsiders in different ways. And I didn't feel that they were especially memorable as individuals beyond their outsider status of a certain type. But when you put them together, the friendship was really touching and was really affecting. I liked that a lot. I had a lot of mixed feelings about this book actually, because the other thing that I didn't really like, but at the same time still worked. I don't like it in principle, but in practice it was fine. The mind bit where we're looking back is essentially, I mean, what, 200, 150 pages, 200 pages of backstory. That's what the book is to start with. It's just backstory of things that have already happened and actually have no forward momentum whatsoever and not really an enormous amount of relevance. And it's not until you hit the body section that sort of that momentum kicks in. and the story moves forward and the characters gain some agency and some urgency. And I feel like in a way it's a creative writing exercise at the start, isn't it? It's sort of really indulgent to do that much backstory. And it's one thing that sort of writers, you're told, you shouldn't be doing that. You should get on with the story. But I guess the story is the characters in this type of book. And despite the fact as I was reading it, I was like, yep, still on backstory. I still was engaged, and I still was, wanting to turn the page and wanting to know what happened. Not just either to get to the body section and find out what happens next. Although, that was almost like a different type of book completely. And there are bits of it that were just almost farcical, and sort of, you go, well, this is just completely unbelievable, surely, and not in fitting with the rest of the book. But at the same time, it was enjoyable and I liked it and it worked. So, I really don't know whether I liked this book or no. I know I liked this book, but I don't know necessarily why, because when I pick it apart, the constituent parts of it, I'm really not that sure about. I really don't know. But I think the bottom line is that the writing is just so good that it does, make it hang together and give it a satisfying ending and all those things that, ultimately you need, that sort of override the niggling bits along the way. It did tip into sermonising at times. I think that the message that Shafak wants to display about, violence against women and sort of persecution of outsiders, and teaching us to be sort of more empathetic, and that appearances can be deceiving. I like all those messages, but there were moments that it sort of tipped over into sermonising. But on the whole, actually, I think it's really good. Oh, will it make the shortlist? I have to read some of the others. I've got a few more to go, but I don't know whether it will, because compared to the other two, it didn't have sort of that standout quality, something that makes it really unique in the way that the others do. So I don't know. It's what the judges are looking for, isn't it? But anyway, that's what I read. Which was my favourite? That one. That one was my favourite. I liked that a lot. I might have said that at the front. Anyway, but yeah, if you've read any of these books, I'd really like to know what you thought. Or if you fancy any of them too, please do talk to me in the comments below. In the meantime, I'll get back to reading. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!